Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm actually quite intimidated because although I often do talks, I'm usually doing talks to a group of medical researchers, patients, that sort of thing. And I know you're a very varied group. So for some of you, I'm sure this is going to be quite boring. I hope for others, at least, it will be fairly interesting. As this week's progressed, I have gone through thinking, could I break a leg? Could I break an arm? Could my car break down? Could I do anything to avoid coming here on Sunday? Unfortunately, the week went on. I haven't broken a leg, I haven't broken an arm, and my car is still working after a fashion, and so I am here. As it said in my introduction, I am a patient. Most of us are patients at some point in their lives. I'm now 70, I'm nearly 71, but in 1986, at the age of 42, I was diagnosed with a disease called primary biliary cirrhosis. This is an autoimmune liver disease. There are lots of liver diseases, and there are quite a few which are autoimmune, some which are viral, as in hepatitis, and some which are alcohol or drug-related. Mine was an autoimmune disease. When I was diagnosed, I was told initially I probably had a year to live. At 42, that was not exactly scary, but, you know, not what you wanted to hear, especially when you're a single parent with 2 children. Anyway, I went to the Encyclopedia Britannica to find out more about this disease and found it mainly affected women 55 and over. Hang on, I thought, I'm 42. Where does that put me? 2 weeks later at the Freeman, I realised it was really me, and I did have this primary biliary cirrhosis. And at the time, I started asking questions, and I was told basically there was nothing they could do for my disease, but they would always look after me. They would see me regularly. They would take care of my bones, so I was given medication for osteoporosis, which still developed, but never mind. But there was nothing they could do about my liver disease. And this is in the days before liver transplant. So I went through the rigmarole of, you know, I used to go to hospital for biopsies. I took part in tests. Never heard much back about the tests. Never heard much about why they were doing the tests. They were just, you know, will you take part in this? Yes. I would take part in anything if it helped. 1993, they decided I was stage 4 of my liver disease, which meant I actually had cirrhosis in my liver and I would need a transplant. Transplant was just starting at the Freeman, although it had been running at Birmingham for a little while. However, there was a drug that they were using probably to work with alcohol-related liver disease. But as I had cirrhosis, I could go into the programme. Well, I jumped at the chance because you do. You know, when you've got something and it's quite serious, you'll take any chance. And that was the first time I actually met a drug company, that I actually heard from the doctors what was going on. I went to the hospital every day for 21 days. I had a variety of tests, all of which were carefully explained to me. And by day 15, the reason I met the drug company was I was the exception. I was responding. I was the best responder out of all the people that they had taken on. Why was I the best responder? We've never really known. And unfortunately, apart from being the best responder, I was one of the few real responders, and the drug got nowhere. Because for it to get somewhere, it's got to respond in a lot of people. It's got to work for a lot of us. The fact it worked brilliantly for me, and I went from being jaundiced and, you know, lots of problems with my brain and things, I went back to being nearly a normal person. Now, my friends will say, well, were you ever normal? But, you know, that's the way it goes. Anyway, that was December 1993. So the fear of transplant was lifted for a while. In February 1994, I was very fortunate that as a patient of Professor Oliver James, who used to be the dean of this university, I was invited to go along to talk about setting up a patient support group. I wasn't going to go. I'd had my disease for 7 years. What did I want to go and meet other people for? I was coping. I was persuaded to go. It was the best thing I ever did. The first person I talked to also had primary biliary cirrhosis, but she actually had been to Birmingham for a transplant. So, you know, we had a lot in common. We were asked if any of us were really willing to put our head on the line, whatever it is, and go and talk to each other about actually setting up that support group. And somehow I heard myself saying I would do it. I was an administrative secretary at my church, a volunteer, but I was used to dealing with a lot of secretarial and admin work, so I thought, yes, I could go along to that meeting. And that meeting was about a month later, and I was elected as the first secretary of LIVErNORTH, purely on the grounds that the lady sitting next to me said, well, she should be secretary because she can do shorthand. So I became secretary. I said I would do it for 6 months. This was February 1994. I am still secretary of LIVErNORTH. But LIVErNORTH was a catalyst because we started talking to each other, and we were very fortunate. Our consultants started talking to us. They would come along and do talks on liver disease, different aspects of liver disease, because LIVErNORTH is the only other broad liver patient support group in the country apart from the British Liver Trust. We started off as part of the British Liver Trust, we became a regional charity, and then last year we became a national charity. But we deal with all liver diseases. We've got no judgments, we've got no preferences. We deal with all liver diseases, whereas all the other patient support groups tend to be disease specific, which is great, but for a lot of people, they want something a bit more than that. But because our consultants talked to us, you got a bit bolshy, you got a bit brave, you started asking questions. Why does this happen? Why does this happen? What's going on here? And then I was extremely fortunate again in that Professor David Jones, who is the Dean of Translational Medicine, I think it's called, in the Institute of Cellular Medicine here, he became my consultant. The day I met him, he said to me, I'm obsessed with PBC, primary biliary cirrhosis. I said, I'm obsessed with PBC. And he put his hand out and he said, we'll get on well. He says I said it first, but I remember he said it first. And from that day on, we have worked together. We've worked together in all sorts of aspects. We've talked about why does it happen? Why do patients get this? What actually goes on after it? Because in primary biliary cirrhosis, it's 9 women for every 1 man. It's more prevalent in the northeast of England than anywhere else in the world. Why? Still not exactly sure. 20-odd years on, we're still not exactly sure. But he and I decided we would set up within LIVErNORTH a subgroup which was primary biliary cirrhosis led. And he would come and give talks, and we trekked around the northeast of England to various hospitals, Durham, Darlington, Bishop Auckland, I know them well. And he did the talk, and I just got the people there. But what he also did was, he looked into research that we could get involved in. And he actively encouraged patients to get involved in research. How? He would invite us to go and talk in his office. He would invite us to come and see him at the clinic, at our own meeting places. And he would say, let's have a focus group. Let's have this sort of thing. Let's have that sort of thing. Now, in the beginning, I didn't really understand what a focus group meant because I'm very ill-educated, but, I understood eventually it was a few people talking about where we could go. And we had quite a lot of focus groups in my little 3-bedroom semi-detached where doctors were sitting on the floor and I was climbing over them to make the tea and coffee. But we talked through what we could do, what we could look at, and what patients needed. And this was the difference. He wasn't talking about what he needed, it was what patients needed. He once said to me, if I could say to you, if I can take away your biggest problem, which is fatigue, but you still need a transplant eventually, how would you feel? And I said, if you can take away my fatigue, I'll go for a transplant the day you tell me. But at least we were now looking at why PBC patients were fatigued. We still don't know the answer all these years on. It's still a real mystery. We still don't really have treatments, would you believe, all these years on. We have one treatment called ursodeoxycholic acid, which it's hoped will slow down the progress of PBC, but it's not going to cure it. We're also running a trial, a rituximab trial, and rituximab has been proved to work in rheumatoid arthritis fatigue and Sjögren's syndrome fatigue. We're in the position of, we're doing placebo and regular, and we're still a long way into it. We've got another 2 years to go. I always use the royal we, because I am classed by David very kindly as an expert patient. I'm not really an expert patient, but I am an expert at living with primary biliary cirrhosis. I went on to have a transplant, and that was in 1999. So in July, next month, it'll be 15 years since my transplant. Since that time, I've done 2 Great North runs. I've only fast walked them, but I have done them. I've been to several lots of transplant games, and I have numerous medals. I am actually the 2002 100 metres runner, and the 200 metres runner, I think, the next year. I couldn't keep it up after that because I developed plantar fasciitis, so I couldn't really run, but at least I've got those medals and I've got those memories. But when I give talks, I often get asked by consultants, by doctors, by junior doctors, how do you get people involved in research? It's so easy. Get a support group, find a support group. They've got loads of people willing to get involved in research. One doctor once said to me, "Oh yes, but I can stump that. I work with children. You can't get children answering questions." "No," I said, "but you can get their parents. Who is more interested in talking about their children than the parents? Who is more keen to find an answer to the problems the children have than their parents?" There's a professor here who works in autism, and she has done some lovely work just talking to parents and then talking to children, because the parents have given her the ideas and then she's rationalized that with the children, and she's brought the children into it. She's taken them away from the hospital to make it something that, it's more playful for it. I go completely with you about playing, and I actually know Stephen, your stroke victim, and I know his other friend Steve, the other stroke victim, and they are both expert patients. The 3 of us have gone around doing these sort of talks. But we really want to see doctors, nurses, everyone accepting us as interested parties. We even give ideas on what research could be done. Years ago, a lady who was a very lovely lady, beautifully presented, beautifully blonde hair. We knew it couldn't be her own because she was, late 50s, but it was lovely blonde. And she said, well, it was her own hair, but it wasn't her own colour. And she said to one of the doctors, "Do you think women get PBC more than men because more of us dye our hair?" The jury's really still out on it, but you see, she was thinking, she was doing what a lot of us were doing. Why have we got this disease? Why hasn't my friend who lives next door not got this disease? And we have. And we've done all sorts of things. We've come up with something called the PBC 40, which is a questionnaire, which was basically put together by the patients along with medical help. We've produced a DVD on PBC. It's the only liver DVD that there is. It's now been taken up by German doctors who want to produce their own version of it because they're trying to get their patients involved. Patients are keen, patients are willing, and what patients have is usually they have the time to think about their disease, to think about the effect it has on their lives, and to think about what help they need. I recently attended, there's the ESOL conference every year, which this year in London, we had one day set aside for PBC, and I was invited to that. And as part of that, I was also invited to go and be an advocate at a group looking at what do we need to do for PBC patients? What is the next step? And sitting there, I'm sitting next to this very nice German man called Ingo van Thiel, and he turned to me and he said, "So what is your story, Tilly?" So I said, "Oh, well, I'm a patient." And he said, "So we're all sitting here talking about the needs of PBC patients, and you are the only patient in the room. There's something wrong with that." But I thought, well, no, at least you are all trying to help PBC patients, and he is one of the people who has taken up the DVD idea. So, if we can get out there and we can talk to doctors and we can talk to specialists, we can get them interested because we are keen. We are passionately keen about getting involved. We don't just want to be patients who are seen every 6 months or whatever and told, well, we'll see you again, your bloods are doing fine. We don't want to be sent away like that. We want to be involved. We want to have some responsibility for this because it's our lives you're dealing with, that the doctors are dealing with. It's our way of life. I have an article printed in the British Medical Journal. I mean, how cool is that, This was just last year. How old was I? 69. I would never have ever thought about it, but my consultant, Dave Jones, said, I think you should write an article for the BMJ. And his colleague, Julia Newton, said, yeah, go on, write it. So I wrote something. We sent it in. It was accepted. Dave and Julia wrote the medical bit, but it is my article. And it's about life living with the fatigue of my disease. And it is now part of a slide which Dave Jones shows at all these great big conferences, all the big liver conferences, about how patients live. And he says he does that because whilst he can tell them all about PBC, what I can do is tell them about living with it. I often give talks to junior doctors who come to my GP surgery. I go along armed with a newsletter, with leaflets about liver disease, and we talk about my disease, and we get them to try and guess what I've got, and usually they can't quite get there, but eventually they do. And at the end, I say to them, when you go away from here, whatever you become, if you're a GP, if you're a specialist, if you have a woman come into your clinic, late 30s, early 40s, because we now know, it's a much younger age group than was ever thought. If that person talks to you about being tired all the time, don't think menopause, don't think depression, unless along with that you think, what did that old biddy in Cramlington talk to us about? What was her disease? And I think if you can make them laugh that way, they'll go away and they'll remember it. And that's my message always. Steve is a great ambassador for stroke. I try to be a good ambassador for liver disease, but more than that, I try to be an ambassador for getting doctors, researchers of any type interested in why patients should be involved actively in research. Now, I was told to keep this to 15 minutes, and I can see I've got about 10 seconds left. They told me if I went over at 18 minutes, I'd be pulled off with a shepherd's crook. So I'm not going to have that, so I'll just say thank you very much, everyone.